Good morning. I am Loy Parks. I'm the Leadership Development and Institutional Strengthening Specialist with the Caribbean Center for Development Administration, popularly known as CARICAD. This is our fourth webinar for 2023, and we are just absolutely delighted to share this all-important topic with you. Original research from the Caribbean in this area, productivity and innovation, considerations for Caribbean economic development. And in a short while, I will be introducing our guest facilitator for this topic, Shernnel Thompson. But before we get into everything, we just want to make sure that we all understand what are the ground rules for our engagement in this webinar, which will be just an hour and 15 minutes thereabout in total. So we offer these webinars on a monthly basis as a part of our continuous learning and development networking strategy. And so we believe through our CARICAD Leadership Development Program, we're much focusing on our mantra, learn, network, and succeed. So we believe that our development as leaders is not a one-off event, but something that is constantly growing. We're constantly learning. We're constantly needing to network so that we don't reinvent the wheel. And we need to learn to network in order that we can together succeed. All right. So this is a learning opportunity for you all. And so I want to invite you to get all that you can from all of our webinars and other resources that CARICAD has to offer. So how do you get the best out of this virtual learning experience? We invite you to focus, lean in, right? Close all your software applications apart from Zoom. Mute your various phones. Many of you, I would imagine, will be logging in from your office. So you want to even reduce the ringer on your phone if you can't mute it. Remind your colleagues, this is a learning session, and just allow you to give you that little 1 hour just to focus and to get all that you can. And of course, internet bandwidth sometimes is a challenge. Well, to be fair, not only in our region, but certainly in our Caribbean region. And so you want to plug in your internet cable if you have it. Now, for webinars, you don't necessarily have to use the microphones, right? We invite you to use the chat feature to share your comments, share your questions. But if you want to use a microphone, you want to ensure that that is in good working order, you have a good working headset, if you don't have a good inbuilt microphone. All right. So I see lots of good mornings already in the chat. And so good morning to you all. And I want to invite you in the chat. We always like to know who is in the room, where are you joining from? And so invite you to use the chat feature. Tell us where you're joining from. Now, you notice the screen has a map of the Caribbean. We're not assuming that everybody is from the Caribbean, however, even though we know at least most of you are. But tell us, where are you joining us from today? So I see the Trinis are always in the house, So I see Michelle, who is a regular. Hi there, and Arlene Makumi. Yes, Arlene, former board member for CARICAD and one of our distinguished associate consultants. I see Sonia Grogan from Guyana, yes. Lisa Montoute from St. Lucia. Zane from BVI. Elaine, hi Elaine. Elaine from Jamaica, Ministry of National Security. Yes, Naomi also from St. Lucia. Let's see, Ricky, one of our alumni from St. Lucia. Brenda from BVI. Rodney Payne, hi Rodney. Rodney, I know this, if I said, if anybody is going to be here, it must be Rodney. So Rodney, welcome. Rosemary from BVI. I like it. Sean Monroe from Jamaica Defense Force. Welcome, Sean. Good to see you. Good to see you, Carla. Says good morning. Robertine from ANU. Michaela, great to see you. Let's see, Trisha also from Jamaica. Carla from Jamaica. Chandeline, hi Chandeline. Also from Jamaica, Jamaica Customs Agency. Shailene Lawton, hi Shailene. From Jamaica, I see all kinds of names that I know people have done at the other webinars or other courses that we have offered. I love it, I love it, I love it. So you can continue sharing with us. Where are you joining us from today? I personally am joining from Jamaica, although I work remotely for CARICAD from Jamaica. I see Delicia from Grenada. Hi, Delicia. Stephen Smith from Jamaica. Delicia is from Grenada. Oh, I just got some dark chocolate from Jamaica. Let me tell you, folks, you have not had dark chocolate until you have dark chocolate from the Spice Island. Let me tell you, best dark chocolate ever. So we just want to get a little feedback from you, you know, and we want to know, because over, I think Roger, our virtual producer, can let me know how many people registered. Up to yesterday, it was 145 people who registered. So you all registered, right? And so we are curious. What is so fascinating? What fascinates you about this particular webinar topic? Why did it pique your interest? What is it that you're hoping that we can explore today as we look at this topic of productivity, innovation, and considerations for Caribbean economic development? So I see Colleen Hazel, also from BVI, saying good morning. Nice. Arlene is agreeing with me about Grenadian dark chocolate. Yes, it is good. Right, Caroline from Ministry of Labor, Jamaica. Welcome, Caroline. So Elaine says she is concerned about productivity and how can we innovate to increase productivity. Definitely, that is probably my main concern, you know. Particularly, I believe most of us, I do know, are from the public services around the region, you know. And we have a low productivity problem, certainly in our public services, but in our economies generally, you know, how can we bring innovation to bear to increase our productivity, right? Rosemary is interested in sustainable development. Yes, and I like that intersection, you know. So it's wanting to increase productivity, it's wanting to innovate, but how do we marry that with sustainable development? I like that. Naomi says she's interested in the whole business of sustainability as well, and how to increase productivity, you know. And I'm curious, even as we are preparing to hear from our guests today, you know, how, you know, our particular neck of the woods, and by neck of the woods, I'm talking about your particular team, your particular organization, right? Do we even know what productivity looks like for us? What does productivity, I see, hi Dion Jennings, I'm from Jamaica. I believe Dion is my colleague from Ministry of Labor in Jamaica. So you talk about a Ministry of Labor, a Ministry of Social Security. You know, you work in security, national security, whether it's the army or the police. What does productivity actually look like for your particular team or ministry? So Sean is saying the topic may help with considerations to be made towards the ongoing review of our constitution, ultimately republic status. Yes, so Jamaica is actually now seeking to become a republic, and we're undergoing constitutional reform now. Sandra, hi Sandra. So Sandra is also our my friend, and somebody who has journeyed with us all in various ways in this journey of how do we improve our public services. Maria is from Public Services International Caribbean. So she's curious especially about innovation in the Caribbean context. And I like that too. That interests me too, because so often we think innovation is something other people do and then we just copy. I kind of feel that way, you know, and there's nothing wrong with copying from others if it's worth copying. But innovation, I think, is definitely has to be more than copying. Isn't that so? And I'm sure Shernnel will tell us more about it. So Diana is interested in how do we increase and make the workforce more creative and innovative for national and regional development? Very excellent question. I remember a couple webinars ago, one of our colleagues from Trinidad made that point. No, I believe it would have been the webinar just around the time of Carnival in Trinidad, right? We just finished having Carnival in Jamaica. Not as good as Trinidad, let's be honest. But I digress. And no, I think it was Maria said that, asked the question. You know, when you look at Carnival and you look at all the creativity and innovation and the energy that goes into it, you ask yourself, couldn't we bring even some of that creativity, innovation, and energy into our public services? And what's stopping us? What's blocking us? You know? All right. So you can keep your questions coming. What are you curious about in terms of this topic? What made you take the time to log in to this morning? What made you register? What is it you're hoping to gain some insight on that you haven't had before? All right. So Naomi says, how do we meet deliverables in an efficient and timely manner? Indeed. And the question is, have we even defined what efficiency means for us? What does efficiency look like, for instance, when somebody visits the emergency room at a hospital, right? What does efficiency look like in terms of road repairs, transportation, education? And maybe it's not just efficiency, it's also effectiveness, eh? Rosemary has a very good question here in the chat. What would creativity look like in public services? Especially because we tend to be so highly structured. Yes, it might seem like some polar opposites there. Creativity on the one hand, and the kind of structure that we do need some structure in government. We can't just have a free-for-all when we are delivering services for the public using taxpayers' dollars, right? But how do we get a balance between those two things that works for us? And collegiate innovation can birth new processes and opportunities in the public sector for change leadership. I like that. I like that. And, you know, a lot of what we do in terms of our leadership development programming really is around that. How do we become the change leaders that we need to be to bring high levels of productivity and innovation, particularly in our public sector context? But not only that, but beyond that, in all our industries, all our sectors, for the Caribbean economic development that we so crave. So thank you all for sharing those thoughts, and we are bearing those in mind. And so we are basically at the top of the hour, and we are just introducing this topic, productivity and innovation, considerations for Caribbean economic development. So before we get into the topic, and I see Rachel has another comment here in the chat. She wants to understand the productivity environment and what should be included. What are some of the analytics that are involved in measuring this? Good question, good question. So a little bit about the work that we do. CARICAD is over 40 years old. It's an arm of CARICOM designed to support member states in the area broadly of public sector transformation. And what you see listed here are the list of services, technical assistance that we offer to member states and also to regional organizations. So we offer capacity building and technical assistance in the area of governance and policy development, leadership development, HR, management, development, organizational development and design, strategic planning, resource-based management, change management, digital government, business process reengineering, and the list goes on. All right. And we do so mainly, our work is driven by the Caribbean Public Service Charter. And what you see here is what we affectionately refer to as our charter house. And this just sets out the principles of our charter, which basically is a common framework to guide public sector transformation across our member states. And so more information about our services, about the public service charter, those can be accessed from our website, www.caricad.net. So I am going to stop sharing my screen now and allow our guest to start to share his. And our guest, I am quite delighted to introduce to you Mr. Shernnel Thompson. Now, Shernnel, I first met Shernnel back in 2019 when he did his first CARICAD leadership workshop. And he just can't get enough of us. You know, he has been highly trained as a leader. He is currently an economist and manager at the Research, Statistics, and Data Analytics Department at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, where he leads a team in evaluating financial stability risks across the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, all right? There's so much you can say about him, right? But I'm just giving you the top highlights, okay? He is currently pursuing a doctoral degree in economics from the University of Paris, Nanterre, with the Economics X Laboratory. I hope I pronounced that right, Shernnel. So he's really sharing from his thesis. He's at the tail end. And when he told me about it, I said, no, come on, Shernnel, you have to share with us some of the things that you're finding, all right? And so his thesis examines the role of innovation in reducing inequality in small open economies, all right? He has a master's in financial and business economics from the University of the West Indies. And so this topic is really of importance to us because as you have all shared, you know, from the initial question, you know, why you're curious, why you chose to engage in this webinar, it really is that we know we in the region have been suffering from low levels of productivity, all right? And that has conversely led to lower than desired levels of socioeconomic growth for us. So this is something that is the monkey on our back that we, if we're going to move forward as a region, we have to break. And we have to be the ones to break it. And we have to rely not just on research done elsewhere, but we need to do more of our own research. We doing our own research about ourselves and finding our solutions for ourselves. So without further ado, I hand over now to Shernnel. Shernnel, you can start sharing your screen and get right into it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parks, for your very kind introduction. And it is a pleasure to be here this morning. As Dr. Parks would have indicated, I am Shernnel Thompson. I am a doctoral candidate at the University de Paris Nanterre, and it's the Economics Laboratory. So you just pronounce it straight as economics. And under the supervision of Professor Marc Baudry, also of that laboratory and university. The topic, again, for this morning is on productivity and innovation considerations for Caribbean economic development. And I trust that I'll be able to, at least in part, answer some of the questions that you have, highlighting some of the research that I've already conducted and showing you some of the research that is currently existing, that is currently present within the field of productivity and the economics of innovation. Now, given that my regular job is at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, I'm obligated to indicate to you that the views and the positions and conclusions expressed in this presentation are my personal views, and they're not endorsed by or reflective of the official policy position of the ECCB or its member governments. So in terms of today's presentation, I'm going to carry you through about 5 sections. The first would be trying to get a good understanding of productivity and its dynamics. Then looking at innovation and growth, the whole concept of innovation and economic growth and how they're connected. Then examining some other considerations for innovation, and that is mainly its potential effect on inequality. And then looking at how countries themselves can work with firms through national innovation systems to foster an innovative environment and to enhance productivity and economic growth and competition in the long run. And then I'll point to some ways forward, and then we can open the floor for any discussions. Some of the key messages that I want you to sort of focus on and keep in mind as we are going through this presentation is one, primarily that countries globally have experienced what we call a secular decline in productivity over the past few decades. And that decline is actually more pronounced in small open economies like the Caribbean. The second idea is that in order to enhance productivity, countries within the region need to enhance their pace of innovation to meet the changing global environment. And we'll see why this is important as we go through the presentation. And finally, Caribbean countries, while fostering innovation, must also balance the needs of society and business development or firm development. So how do we speak about or understand what productivity is? So from a strictly economic point of view, it's really defined as a ratio between output volume and volume of inputs. And what you're looking at is, based on the level of output that you have, how much of the inputs that you're contributing to that, how much of the output that you're generating, is related to the inputs or the combination of inputs that you're using. And what it also considers is really not just the combination, but how they're being used, the efficiency of those inputs. And the inputs that we typically focus on in the literature are capital and labor, but there are also other inputs like price and probably fertilizer, for example, if you're dealing with productivity in the agricultural sector. And we also need to remember that productivity is really considered a key source of growth and competitiveness for countries and firms. And this is important because often when we speak about productivity, or often when we speak about firm growth or country growth, we seem to speak about the two as sort of separate. We speak about countries achieving economic activity in sort of a separate language. And then we speak about productivity issues as sort of a separate idea or separate topic. And the reality is that they're both interconnected. Without productivity, countries can't grow faster. Without productivity, they can't be as competitive. And the same thing goes for firms, even within a specific country like Jamaica, for example. Without productivity, firms aren't able to grow as fast or to be as competitive within their specific sector. The other thing that we want to consider as we discuss productivity is that it may be actually hampered by some key things. So at the country level, we see issues such as aging populations, which of course affects the labor aspect. We see slowdowns in global trade, but we also see crises playing an important role, and the legacy associated with those crises playing an important role in whether or not countries are as innovative and whether firms are as innovative as they should. And so to discuss and to understand the whole idea of productivity, we use a measure called total factor productivity, which is really looking at the gap between the outputs and the level of inputs used in production. And we'll see some of those statistics coming out of the research as we go down. So considering global productivity dynamics, as I would have said in the opening, there's been a secular decline in global total factor productivity from roughly the 1970s all the way down through 2018. But we would have seen, of course, prior to the 1970s that there would have been certainly an uptick in productivity. And we can connect those to a variety of things. We can see the invention of the computer, for example, new manufacturing processes, globalization beginning to take hold. And so we see how those dynamics leading up to the 70s would have contributed to that growth. But then we also see as countries begin to even out, as they begin to catch up to what we consider the frontier, that productivity itself would have started slowing down. When we examine advanced economies in particular, we see a similar type of activity happening where the advanced economies would have increased and would have been responsible for a great degree of the global output that we're seeing up until the 1970s. And then they would have begun sort of channeling off and eventually declining up until 2019. When we look at productivity specifically for large open economies, we see that between 1970 and 1979, it was essentially at its highest, the growth rate of total factor productivity, that is. And we would have seen that growth in a similar fashion to what we're seeing in advanced economies, in a similar fashion to what we're seeing at the global level, that growth beginning to peter out from the 1980s all the way up until 2019. But notice that in the chart itself, that the declines become less steep as time progresses. So it's not that they're falling, that productivity is falling rapidly amongst large open economies, but that from 1980 onwards, in as much as it's declining, is by a marginal amount. When we examine large economies further, we also see that total factor productivity, or TFP, is really contributing to a lot of the economic growth that you would be seeing in the countries. So this simple scatter plot between average total factor productivity and average real economic growth shows countries like the United States, for example, being really relatively high on productivity at above 0.9. But also being relatively high in terms of real economic growth. We see some commodity producers like Qatar, for example, like Kuwait, for example, Saudi Arabia, also being very much at the top of that list. And of course, the greater the output, the greater the use of labor and capital, the easier it is for these countries to attain that objective. But when we look at productivity and efficiency in small open economies in particular, we see, for example, that small open economies, in a similar fashion to large open economies, would have also experienced a high productivity growth rate in the 1970s. But in this case, where we're disaggregating it by every 5 years or so, what we're seeing is that from 1970 to 1974, we would have seen essentially a high level of TFP growth, and then that would have changed between 1975 and 1979, which would have been related primarily to the oil crisis period. And then we would have seen the countries essentially struggle to make it back, to get back to near 1970, early 1970s levels. And then with another ensuing crisis, we would have seen that TFP level slowly peter out. And so what you're seeing is that in the small open economies, unlike the large open economies, where TFP declined sort of marginally over the 1980s into the 2000s, the small open economies are suffering a bit more from the crisis events. So we would have seen again in 1995 into 1999, I think that was the Asian crisis. Then you would have seen the same effect roughly 2010 following the global financial crisis, 2010 into 2014. But notice TFP within small open economies has not essentially recovered to near original levels since the early 1990s. And that points to, yes, the vulnerability of the economies to shock, but it also explains a lot why our growth rates have been, for the most part, relatively low and particularly volatile as well. And so that volatility is really coming from the broad scarring that you're seeing. So it's like you get cut and you see the scar there, you still feel the pain. Your hand is working again, but you still feel a little bit of pain. So when we examine what we call technical efficiency frontiers within small open economies, and technical efficiency just here is a component of that total factor productivity calculation. So just to take a step back, if you're estimating TFP, what you're doing is really asking not just what productivity is like overall, but what are the components of productivity that I can attribute to actual technological enhancement or technological change? What are the aspects that I can kind of affix to efficiency, either at the firm level or at the country level? And then there are other tiny aspects such as returns to scale, for example, and even the impact that policy has on productivity. But for now, we're just going to focus on the technical efficiency and the technical change aspects of it. So in terms of the technical efficiency and the results that we see from the technical efficiency for small open economies, or at least the selected small open economies that you see here on the chart, you see really that on average technical efficiency, or the efficiency of the use of inputs between labor and capital, remains relatively low at roughly 0.4. There are exceptions where countries like Trinidad, for example, or Djibouti would have had higher levels of technical efficiency and higher averages as well. But for the most part, the countries stay within that 0.4 range, which suggests implicitly that the uses of labor and capital by our countries and by the firms within the countries may not be the best. What we also saw from some of the results, and I don't have the chart here, but that the technical change figures that we saw coming out of the small open economy estimates were actually quite low. They were in some cases much lower than the technical efficiency estimates. And so what that does is that it places countries like the Caribbean as small open economies further away from that optimal production level, that frontier of production, where countries and firms are using labor and capital as efficiently and effectively as possible. Now, when we dive into having discussed, the ideas surrounding productivity, the next step is to ask, how then can we enhance productivity and thereby enhance growth? And the simple way through that is through innovation. And so in broad economic terms, innovation really describes the development and application of ideas and technologies to improve goods and services or make their production more efficient. And a lot of this work would have started with an idea from an economist called Joseph Schumpeter, who would have posited the idea of creative destruction, which is identifying and deliberately removing some established processes to make room for more efficient processes. But there are some principles that allow that to take place. And the first is competition. The second is capital. You also need entrepreneurship, and you also need innovation. What I should say here as a caveat is that this was done at a time when the focus was more on a capitalist society and a more capital-oriented approach to development. And so some of these facets, although they would have been, they still remain quite relevant, would change and have changed over the years. Another person that we focus on in the literature who's really famous and also within the research network that I'm affiliated with is a French economist called Philippe Aghion. And Philippe suggests rather that there are two main ways for countries to grow. The first is through imitating what you call the frontier, or that optimal point, in order to allow for a catch up. And then the second is to innovate with yourself internally. So you look at your own processes and you develop and be in essentially competition with yourself in order to get to the points where you have to go. And so countries that are far below that frontier or far below that optimal level, the main source of growth for them is innovating internally. However, when you're closer to the frontier, the main source of growth for you is really frontier innovation. So looking outside and looking towards what other countries are doing and being in competition with them. And so a good example of innovating internally initially would have been, for example, Korea, when they would have been a middle-income country and they were trying to get to that point of high income. They would have done a lot of work internally. They would have developed their own industries. They would have pushed the knowledge boundaries. But then as soon as they got to that point, they would have shifted the way in which they're trying to achieve their goals. So they would have become more competitive internationally. When we look at innovation and growth within the region, another measure that we use is really innovation intensity, and that is done through examining patent filings. Now, when we looked at patent filings in the CARICAD region, we noticed right off the bat that patent filings were very, very low. And what this says is that companies and individuals within the Caribbean, within the CARICAD region, are actually not innovating as much as they ought to. They are not filing those patents to key ideas and key products and key goods and services. So we're not really inventing a lot. And when we compare it to a Singapore, for example, and I've used the Singapore comparison primarily because of the size. It's relatively close in size to Jamaica, for example. I mean, it's still a far way off, but it's about 5 million persons. Jamaica is about 2.3, 2.4. When we look at the level of patent filings emerging from a Singapore, we see that it's on the right-hand side of the chart. It's approaching 1,800 as of 2020. Whereas if we look at where CARICAD filings are on the left-hand side of the chart, from the World Bank data, we see that it's just approaching 40. And we have this issue as well in the Eastern Caribbean, where if you engage with some of the intellectual property offices, you see quite clearly that patents are being filed, and the patents that are actually coming through the offices, some of them tend to be sort of globally filed patents. And there are several reasons for this. It includes, population dynamics, the nature of the industry, the presence of knowledge institutions and how knowledge is diffused. And then there are other structural issues that need to be considered. And so in considering the diffusion and adoption of innovation within developing countries and the Caribbean, we need to determine where we want to be in that frame, whether we want to be creators and diffusers of innovative ideas and technologies, products, or whether we want to be adopters. And for the most part, we are adopters. And if we are going to continue in the adoption frame, we need to consider things like adaptability, utility, and complexity of the products that we are adopting. We also need to consider education and whether or not the labor force that we have can actually use the technology that we are trying to adopt. And we also need to consider financial needs, because at the end of the day, it still takes money to adopt new technologies. And so we would definitely need external support, especially if you're going to consider things like green technologies, for example. If we're considering diffusion, there are another list of things that we need to consider. Economic openness, information channels, information and communication technologies, how broadband internet is even structured, what that infrastructure looks like, and then can we actually do it in terms of financial support, and then how do we enforce it? How do we enforce the rights surrounding that knowledge? The other consideration for innovation and pursuing an innovative path is broadly at the country level, really linking income inequality and innovation. And the research has shown so far that innovation which entails creative destruction in particular, really increases top income inequality and social mobility for the top 1%. But for the bottom 99%, it does not increase broad income inequality. So the bottom 99% basically stays where they are. And the discussion is still ongoing because of that mixed relationship. We see in some cases where having a new technology or having a new process can actually eliminate jobs. And so that is a source of concern. Even though the way, for example, that social protection comes into play in the broader society is something that needs to be considered as we examine the whole push towards an innovative environment. So for the public sector in particular, innovation that typically originates out of the public sector is most likely to be used as a public good, and it is applied readily as an equalizer. So the inequality issue becomes less of a challenge for countries as they innovate from the public sector side. And a simple example of this would be for example, in the United States, ARPA, Advanced Research Projects Agency, they work with the private sector in public-private partnerships to enhance the defense of the United States, but defense is in itself a public good. You also have BARDA, which is a biomedical, I think, Advanced Research Projects Agency as well. And they were the ones that helped to facilitate the development of the RNA technology used in the COVID vaccine. And so we see how that public good effect is necessary and sustains innovation from the public sector side. Of course, on the private sector side, it leads to increase in inequalities for top earners. So the rich get richer in effect, and that disparity between those entrants actually increases. On low wage earners from the private sector side, it may have a disproportionate impact on them if there's an increase in prices. But on a whole, the consideration is that it would serve as an equalizer between income groups within the society. And so again, if you want to balance innovation and inequality, you need to consider social protection for enhancing the social protection framework in Caribbean countries, fostering education in all its forms to ensure that persons have the requisite skills to function in that environment, but also strengthening the fair trading and competition policies within the region. Because at the end of the day, in as much as you may have an infantile industry, you want to be able to balance protecting that industry with enhancing competition. And so what are some of the approaches, or what is one approach that a country can use? It's mainly developing what we call national innovation systems. And NISs are not national insurance services, but national innovation systems allows for the flow of technology and information between persons, firms, and institutions. And it is a really key part of the process and helps to bring those complex relationships together. It also helps policymakers consider the best approach when interacting in that space and trying to balance technological development with the implementation of that innovative good or service, and fostering that public sector role, fostering economic development. So a broad framework that you see here on the right-hand side, which was posited by Onyango, Kivati, Kitaka, and Kibuba, shows what that relationship looks like. It shows how firms at the very center are interacting with each other. They may have supporting institutions and other research bodies. So we can call those the universities of the West Indies, for example, the various campuses, and then how that information or that knowledge is diffused throughout the society. What regulations, for example, are in place to allow for the diffusion of that knowledge and the development of that knowledge? Are there any education and training systems in place? What are the communication infrastructures? And all of that goes together to facilitate product development, but also enhance, at the end of the day, country performance and competitiveness. However, in implementing national innovation systems, there are several areas that need to be considered. The first is the interaction between firms and policymakers. We do know that there are issues regarding lobbying, for example, which may be a challenge. Having more applied research emanating from key sectors, and how that research is actually transferred between individuals. So is it that, for example, when the University of the West Indies creates knowledge through its various doctoral programs, through its various departments, is that information effectively transferred to persons within the region? Or is it just transferred to the specific campus countries? So that is a simple example of how that knowledge transfer system can work. And then even if it is transferred, how do you ensure at the point of receipt that that information is distributed within the network that you have control over? And so what is the way forward, or some considerations for innovative Caribbean societies? Well, the first is really to from a strictly practical point of view, examine and enhance any existing processes and establish and replace those processes with more low-cost, efficient processes. And I know that can be a little bit difficult to attain sometimes, but I would give you an example that I listened to, or I heard some years ago. So if you remember Gordon Brown, the United Kingdom Prime Minister, he made a presentation in Parliament some years ago, where he literally indicated that by replacing mail reminders by the NHS, which is the National Health Service, with phone reminders, that it saved the NHS at least 12 or 15 pence, sorry, on every single sheet of paper that they were using. And so it ended up saving the NHS millions of pounds at the end of the day. So it's really looking to see where more efficient processes can be implemented, and then making a play for or recommending those to either the ministers of government or to your permanent secretaries where necessary, and working through that system. The other thing that you can do is to work to enhance knowledge transfer between established research institutions and the private sector. You can do more public-private partnerships, and so you would ensure that the knowledge that the private sector has can be easily transferred to the public sector by that interaction. You may also want to consider more mission-oriented innovative goals. And this comes out of Mariana Mazzucato, who's also another professor on innovation. And a simple example of this would be the Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program, where this program is actually working to enhance broadband access and access to broad digital technology within the region. And so more of those mission-oriented goals, either at the country level or even regionally within CARICAD, can assist in achieving some of those big ticket items that we need to achieve. And this has been done elsewhere. So for example, the European Space Agency is a prime example of that, where the mission-oriented goal was getting a rocket, launching a rocket to space, and the European Space Agency and all the countries invested in that agency work together to help achieve that goal. And ultimately, you want to consider the retention of a strong intellectual property framework and a judicial system which can help to resolve challenges surrounding that framework. So if there are any rights challenges to any developments that would have occurred, you want to ensure that persons are able to to find some resolution in the judicial system. And finally, to ensure a balance between protecting infantile industries and fostering competition within the region. China, for example, would have started with an infantile industry approach in terms of their initial development, and then they opened up their doors to allow for competition. But in the meantime, they ensured that the industries that were developing had enough, were receiving the requisite funding sometimes, they were receiving the requisite knowledge transfers, and the requisite aspects of innovation to foster their development, which would then allow them to compete effectively on the global scale and on the global stage. And so those are some of the things that we also need to consider when we establish our way forward. So thank you very much for listening, and I am grateful for any questions that you may have on the presentation or anything that you think I should be able to answer. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Shernnel. Very, very interesting. And in fact, there are some comments, some serious, discussions starting already in the chat. So let me kind of just go through. I hope I'm not missing anything. So one of the points that between Rosemary and O'Neill they were making is this, that perhaps part of the challenge we have in the Caribbean, I hope I'm summarizing it correctly, Rosemary and O'Neill, is that maybe it's not so much that there's a low level of innovation, but there's a low level of patents being registered. In other words, a lot of this is happening informally, but what we know when we're doing formal research and we're measuring these things, one of the things we're looking at is, registration of patents, for example, which might be low because the filing of patents sometimes is cumbersome. O'Neill made a point that some improvement in this has happened, at least in the Jamaican context. But what are your own thoughts about this? What they're bringing up here, Shernnel?
Right. So thank you for that. So that is a really important point. This I know for the Eastern Caribbean itself that they have been working on making that filing process more efficient. I'm not entirely certain how much progress they've made, but I do recognize, even from looking at the statistics, when I started out trying to measure innovation in a particular way, that I literally could not find any patent data for the Eastern Caribbean. And it was just a simple handful of patents that were filed. So that process needs to be strengthened, definitely. If there is a high cost attached to it, that may also be something to consider. So are the filing fees high? And do persons really understand what they are using the system for? Because it may be that persons are, as rightfully said, developing new goods, developing new services, but simply don't think that they need to file for it. And then the other part of it is recording that information, how those statistics are recorded. And it is only now, admittedly, that more and more statistical agencies are considering what we call the intangible economy, for example, in the whole frame. So we would have seen the IMF, for example, this year, or I believe late last year, having a large seminar on that, discussing how the intangible economy can be more effectively monitored, and even how in our own business books, how we record things like research and development. Do we consider hiring a market analyst who does market research, part of research and development, or do we stick it under marketing in the income and expenditure statements at the end of the day?
Okay, thank you, Shernnel. Now I see Craig Peru. Hi, Craig, I see your hand. So I'm going to come to your hand shortly, Craig. But just taking another comment that was made in the chat, and I did see you make a reference to this very issue as well in one of your slides, Shernnel. And maybe you can say a little bit about our education system. And so the thinking here is that our education system really, I mean, there might be pockets of it that is fostering, you know, the innovation and creativity mindset in our students. But by and large, our education systems tend to promote, to quote Rosemary, sameness rather than diversity. In other words, our innovation systems, our education systems are not fostering innovation. What are your thoughts on that?
So thank you for that question. I would answer that question, unfortunately, with a question or something to think about. The ultimate question for Caribbean development at the end of the day is, I think, what do we want ourselves to look like 50 years from now? And I think in answering the what do you want yourself to look like 50 years from now, you can say, what leaders do we need to lead the countries 50 years from now? And leaders, not just political leaders, but industry leaders. And in answering that leadership question, what the other question becomes, how do we educate for that leader that we want to develop, that we want to have lead us 50 years from now? And so I think because for the most part, we have not seemed to have tackled that vision question, I think, quite effectively. I think we're still struggling with the educational part of it. I do think as well that, I mean, we've done a lot of work in trying to get, for example, technical and vocational schools up and running and having them play a more important role in society. But in some spaces, it is still sort of frowned upon culturally. So if you are saying that you're going to a quote unquote a technical college in some countries, persons are going to look at you a little weird and say, well, did you not pass? What happened there? You know, but the reality is that if you want to have plumbers, if you want to have electricians, if you want to have a space, if you want to have musicians, entertainers, that those colleges and those spaces are the best spaces to allow for that type of development. So I think, again, on the one hand, what do we want to look like? But on the other hand, we need to also change our perception of education as emanating from only specific sources, i.e. university, secondary school, you know, the strict college academic sources.
Yeah, thank you. All right, there are two hands up now. So let's go to Craig first. So Craig, yes, Craig, go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parks. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm from the Mona School of Business and Management at the University of the West Indies. And so there's some things from my perspective as a faculty member I'd like to share. So at UWI Mona, we've been very good in the past, last say 30, 40 years at generating new knowledge and registering patents. And we were so good at it that we found that it became a financial drain because we would register these patents in the United States and then we wouldn't commercialize them. And so what I want to commend to us as Caribbean people is that we work from the money backwards. It's the commercialization that matters, not the patents. You can generate lots of patents and be able to boast in international fora that you have lots of patents, but you have no money to show for it. So there's a concept called technology readiness levels that I'd like to recommend to us as Caribbean people. We need to think not just about generating the new knowledge, but how do we commercialize this new knowledge, right? That's extraordinarily important because, as I said, UWI and other tertiary institutions, that's not been our falling down. That's not our constraint. It's the commercialization. Second, the notion of non-R&D innovation is another concept that's very relevant to us in the Caribbean people because our strengths have been in tourism and in the culture, the orange economy, right? Which those are not areas that tend to be dominated by the kinds of knowledge that are patented, right? So we need to play to our strengths, and in doing so, we can use one of the slides Shernnel put up talked about, the kinds of innovation that we should focus on. Should we, in terms of the orange economy, tourism and cultural entertainment, we can be leaders at the global frontier because we are already near to the global frontier there. But when you look at manufacturing, when we are so far behind, and even agriculture, then adopting technologies from more advanced economies like Netherlands or even Uruguay, which they're great at agriculture, that might be more suitable for us. So those are just two thoughts I wanted to share. Well, there's just one last one, back to this patents thing. The current patent system worldwide, ladies and gentlemen, was created by the advanced economies to protect their interests. And there is an enormously rich trove of literature which shows that if we, as small island developing states, pursue the route of patents, it's not likely to work out very well for us because it was developed to protect the interests of the wealthy countries. Just think about the COVID-19 pandemic and the issue of vaccines. Yeah. Right? So I am not a fan of emphasizing patenting because you look at even the most prominent cases of IP litigation in Jamaica in the last 20 years. Lasco and CARICAD went up against Pfizer. It took 17 years for them to get a judgment, and those are the wealthiest firms in Jamaica, right? So you cannot, it's not feasible for us to defend our patents. And in that case, the judgment was for the Caribbean firms. But nevertheless, 17 years, any market advantage you wanted is gone, right? Yeah. And in the digital space, it's the same thing. The software developer who developed the software that Paymaster and Grace Kennedy fought over, 17 years for judgment. So let's watch the money and not so much the patents. Thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen.
Great comments there, Mr. Peru. Great comments. Shernnel, I wonder if you have any feedback to that before we take O'Neill's question. I see O'Neill's hand up.
No, I agree with I'm assuming Dr. Peru. In terms of the commercialization of the patents, it's definitely an issue that I've seen and I'm myself worried about. How do we commercialize some of the products, the goods and services that we are producing more effectively and more efficiently? So I agree with him completely. So thank you very much for those comments.
All right. O'Neill, go right ahead, O'Neill. O'Neill, we're not hearing you as yet. You want to adjust your microphone? All right, so O'Neill may be having a challenge with his microphone. But let me see, there are quite a number of comments in the chat. Let me tell you, I'm hoping we can get to them all. So, one of the questions from the chat that, but some people are just making reference to what Craig spoke about. So Sandra is asking a question here. What is your view of the thesis and its applicability to the Caribbean? So Shernnel, you made reference to Mazzucato, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. And so given our focus on the role of government, the state and public services, and given that, you know, this audience, by and large, are from the public services of our region, what's your view on the applicability of her thesis and to the Caribbean context?
Thanks for that. So in terms of Mazzucato, I think her positions and her approach to innovation research is quite applicable. She's focused mainly on trying to link the idea of public policy and innovation. And she's actually done some work with ECLAC on fostering sustainable tourism development within the region. So there are elements of her work that I think can definitely be used The challenge, of course, is regionalism and how we view our interactions. So while we here within the CARICAD space are communicating well, we have the same agenda, we have the same objectives, we want to learn, we want to understand what is happening. I think regionally, the political will is often the hindrance. So if you are trying to achieve some core objectives, unified objectives at a very broad regional level, I think you may have some challenges there. And we've seen, I guess, a few examples of those in terms of projects that may have been started and stopped at the regional level or just not acted on. And so I think we need to get past that a little bit and determine what it is that we're trying to achieve at the end of the day, and how do we think it can benefit all of us.
All right, thanks. So O'Neill, I'm going to try and get him again. O'Neill, is your microphone working now? All right, so O'Neill, your microphone, although you're unmuted, it's not coming on. So we're so sorry about that. There's another, well, it's not just a question. There are a series of comments that are in the chat. And if I were to kind of, do some sort of summary question, as it were, and it really has to do with how we manage our human resources, particularly in our public services, and the extent to which we don't seem to encourage that in the public service. Our performance management systems, for example, are outdated. They do not align with that thrust of how do we encourage increased innovation and productivity in our public services. And so what are your thoughts? What has your research been finding? And any thoughts you have about how might we even begin to address these challenges? Yes, Shernnel, you're muted.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I was writing, actually. My apologies. Right. So I haven't zeroed in completely on human resource management within the public service. So I think it is something that I would have to spend more time with. But sort of off the top of my head, my mind goes back to, is the public service in itself designed to be as dynamic and to respond to some of the challenges that are being faced by the country at the time? So the relevant arms of the civil service. If that dynamism is there, then it should be a space then where innovation and creativity are encouraged. And so overall, the leaders within the civil service would then need to adjust how they're developing their human resources in order to attain those broad objectives. I think for the most part, the civil service, the public service seems to be sort of very stuck in its ways. And so to get past that, the question becomes, how do we engage, I think, ultimately the policymakers, the ministers, in trying to foster that level of engagement and trying to create a system that allows for that nimbleness, that dynamism, and that innovation, that creativity overall. So I hope I would answer your question. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Now we're almost out of time, but I see that Janora has her hand up. So Janora, asking you to unmute. And if you could share your question quickly.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Okay, so it's not Janora, it's actually O'Neill.
Like, oh, you just logged in at somebody else. All right, no problem.
Yeah, she was kind enough. So quickly. the part of chasing the money that our colleague made previously, my question is, do we really though have the capacity, the physical capacity to monetize our innovations the way that we really need, much like how China would have done and so on? That's one. Two, as it relates to the issue about technical schools and stuff, for real, I agree with Mr. Thompson that it was frowned upon. Jamaica, I think, suffered from that. You know, the whole cultural stereotype of you going to a technical school, you don't really have much education. But now, with the gig economy and how things have evolved, we realize that was really the most practical and logical choice we should have made. And as such, we are slow in our economic growth because we're not fully capitalizing and have not fully caught up with where things are going. Finally, I'd like to just raise one last point. As it relates to the COVID and innovation, I think our economies in the Caribbean missed a golden opportunity. We sat here for 3 years pining, hoping for this thing to blow over so we can go back to normal, and I don't think we use the opportunity to really get back to the drawing board, go into the lab and get some new things out and find new ways of adapting. Because let's say COVID blows over, something else comes again that cripples us for another 5 years. What do? Sit and wait and hope that things will get better and we'll go back to normal. What is normal? We missed the opportunity, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anil. So Shernnel, before you respond, because time is going, I'm going to allow Rachel has her hand up. So let's take Rachel's question or comment, and then we'll just ask you to just, make one final comment in response. Rachel, go right ahead.
Hi, thank you, and a very good morning to everyone. Now, I just want to make two points. Number one, it appears that productivity often gets lagging and not placed at the center of the workplace in the public sector. I'm just looking at Grenada, and if I do like a historical account, sometimes we have consultants come in and we pick up, and it's just like ad hoc initiatives, and then it lapses. So I am thinking that having an institutional mechanism or an organization that is specific for innovation and creativity, who to spearhead it on a national level would be a very good idea, and that organization is going to ensure the integration and effective collaboration, and that would enable innovation and productivity to be at the center of the workplace, especially in the public sector. There must be that organization that is spearheading it. And secondly, in terms of the human resource question that was asked earlier, I want to highlight the significance of performance management. That let us not forget that the foundation of productivity is performance management, meaning high-performing and innovative employees are the foundation of performance management. So that is also lagging in the region. So we need to ensure that we move away from the performance appraisal and institute the entire performance management system in all countries in the region to ensure that what is at the bottom line that will impact heavily on productivity is the performance management. And there are a lot of considerations, but I will end here. Thank you
so much, Rachel. So Shernnel, I leave the final comments and responses to you. Over to you, Shernnel.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Parks. So thank you both for your comments and questions. To Anil, the question of whether we have the physical capacity to monetize sort of any advancements that we have. I think if we're considering developments, especially locally, so we are trying to foster firm development locally, the short answer I would say is yes. The challenge becomes that the institutions, the financial institutions are for the most part risk averse. And so in being risk averse, what they are likely to do is to extend higher loans, higher interest rate loans for firms or for small businesses, for medium-sized businesses, in order to get their product or their service launched. And that is obviously going to dissuade that level of development or that level of that launch from happening. And so definitely, in as much as the institutions may lobby the regulators and may lobby governments, it's also incumbent, I think, upon both the governments and the institutions, the regulators, sorry, to also lobby the financial institutions to lower their rates, to allow businesses to develop their products and to achieve that monetization. I also agree with you in terms of the COVID and the missed opportunity within innovation. And I see an example here where with COVID, we had the advent of telemedicine. And so you had doctors doing telemedicine, you had traveling doctors as well. So persons started driving around delivering medical services to homes, and that took off. In fact, the prices, if you looked at inflation for medical services as a subsector in some of the islands of the Eastern Caribbean, it went up significantly. However, as soon as COVID was over, a lot of those services dropped out. And so you then ask yourself, is it really a case where we recognize the opportunity? Is it really a case where we really wanted to consider or to achieve that new service, or is it was just something that we were doing for the time being? And finally, to Ms. Farry, again, in terms of the institutional mechanisms, I agree with you. Having that institutional mechanism in place, or even collaborating more deeply with existing institutions such as the UWI campus, for example, and some of the work that they're doing can help foster a higher level of productivity, whether it be within firms or within the civil service. And certainly managing those resources, those high-performing resources is certainly very important. So again, thank you very much for your questions, your comments. I really enjoyed today's presentation. I did get a lot of food for thought as well. And I really appreciate being invited here by Dr. Parks and the team at CARICAD. So thank you.
Thank you too so much, Shernnel Thompson. No, lots of food for thought. I mean, in fact, we're a little over time because there's just so much food for thought. But we're just going to wrap up now and just sharing a few very important announcements from CARICAD. So next month, we are not going to have just one webinar, but we have our webinar series. And this year, for the month of May 9, May 16, May 23, and May 30, we have our climate governance webinar series. We know that our Caribbean region is one of the most vulnerable in terms of climate change impacts. And so we want to use this webinar series to focus on climate governance. And we kick off on May 9 with our partner, SEDIMA, Caribbean Disaster and Emergency Management Agency, where they are going to set the foundation to talk about climate governance as an essential imperative. Then on May 16, we have Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator, another one of our partners. And they are going to be sharing a tool that they developed, I think, last year. We have been piloting it across some of the Caribbean countries, and it's called the Blue Green Economy Island Scorecard. You know, we want to know, you know, not just talk about theory, but how do we practically do these things, gather the data to help us to make those critical decisions around how we respond, prepare for climate change, etc. May 23, we are collaborating with another partner. As all of these agencies we have MOUs with, and that's CRIF SPC. And they will be talking about climate governance and disaster risk financing. And then we at CARICAD would take we're the last one up to the wicket, and we are looking at redesigning government for effective climate governance. And we recently concluded a project in the Commonwealth of Dominica, where we basically restructured and redesigned the entire public service of Dominica. And one of the core themes that we had to adhere to is this business about how to design the public service so that it puts Dominica on the path to become the first climate resilient nation in the world. They have that vision for themselves. And so we want to talk about those practical things, you know, in terms of, okay, it's wanted to talk about climate governance, but how do we design our public services, our organizational structures, our jobs, how do we design those in order to make sure they're aligned to set up the public service to support effective climate governance. So those are webinars that we're coming up in May. So look out for the advertisement, register, it's free. A lot of time, you know, we send out the things that people are like, how much is it? And we're like, it's free, free, free. All our webinars are free, all right? So look out for that, register, share the invitation with others. And in July, wanted to save this date, July 11, 2023, we will have CARICAD's virtual symposium. And we're looking at the theme, innovation, digital government, and changing mindsets for public sector transformation. So save that date. Again, that is also free. We are partnering with a number of international organizations to deliver this. So you want to save the date. Another awesome capacity building, networking, sharing opportunity around the things that are of concern and interest to us. And we are putting out the call for applications. You look out for that as well for our mid-level leadership development program. Now, you see, Shernnel is a product of our leadership development program. So you know that, you know, this is, you can be like Shernnel, okay? He is like a walking advertisement for our leadership program. But no, please look out for that. You know, you want to register as many people as possible. It's a 3-month program. It will be delivered from September to December virtually. And let me tell you something, it covers things like leading self, having difficult conversations. We talk about the importance of performance management. We talk about that. We talk about things like, you know, environmental sustainability, leadership, values and ethics, you name it, team dynamics. How do we lead public sector innovation, right? These are all some of the wonderful topics that we cover and build capacity in. So for these and other things, don't ever hesitate to contact us. Our email address is right there, info@caricad.net. So I'm going to invite Roger, our virtual producer, just to place the link in the chat. We want to hear from you. There it is. Just fill out the short survey. Let us know how this webinar went. What other topics you're interested in us covering? Because we exist to serve you. We believe that feedback is a gift. So Shernnel, once again, thank you. I can't wait to say Dr. Shernnel Thompson, all the best in your ongoing journey towards completing your doctoral thesis. Thank you all very much. I see people are saying thanks in the chat, Carla and others. So all the best, everybody. We're going to close out now and complete that survey. Have a good rest of the day and a good rest of the week. Thank you all so much.